You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Sanja Haas, and I'm the Chairwoman of the Human Capital Center at the Conference Board in Europe. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Inspiring People, Inspiring Journeys, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. In each episode, I sit down with a new C-suite executive, and together we have a conversation around what helped them transition into their current role, their tips for navigating this incredibly complex, demanding career landscape of today, and what they would consider are the key ingredients for success in their role. Today, I will be sitting down with Mieke van de Capelle, CHRO at dsm-firmenich, to discuss her professional journey, which we hope will help our listeners gain better insights into what is needed or not to have a fulfilling business and HR career journey. A very warm welcome, Mieke. Hello.
Hi, Sanja. Pleasure being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mieke, I usually start this podcast series with the $1 million question of what business are you in? And can you share can you share one insight about your company which is not common knowledge?
All right. Well, we're in a brand new company, actually, because
Hmm.
I am extremely happy to work for dsm-firmenich, which is a freshly merged company between, as the name says, the legacy DSM business and Firmenich business. And maybe the one insight that is nice for people to know, but that they may not know already, is that there's probably over 4 billion consumers that use a product that has something of dsm-firmenich in it
Wow.
every single day. And
Wow.
that is because something of dsm-firmenich features in many, many solutions that go into human nutrition,
Hmm.
uh, you know, healthy ingredients, critical nutrients for health. We also have a very wide range of perfumery solutions that people would use in their daily routines or in their fine fragrance, but also animals. A big part of our business is around animal nutrition and health. So, also hundreds of millions of animals have something with DSM Firmenich every single day. So, we're a business to business company. That's why you may not see our brand,
Hmm.
but we've got your back. You're one of our billion consumers every single day.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sort of thinking maybe I should do a little Trivial Pursuit and put it on the website after this podcast series because this is truly insights that I'm not sure that is really common knowledge to our listeners. Thank you, Mieke. Now, coming back to you now, because this interview is about you, the role, the future. Tell me a bit about your role. What is it like to be a CHRO?
Well, it's being a CHRO is one thing. Being a CHRO in a brand new company
Mm-hmm.
is a whole other thing. I was the CHRO from the Firmenich side of the business, and now after the merger became the CHRO for DSM Firmenich. And it's very, I think, rewarding, but also at times probably a lot more difficult when you're the CHRO or when you're any member of an executive team or for many of our leaders of a freshly built, newly established merged company,
Mm-hmm.
because everything is up for reevaluation. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
beauty, but also I think sometimes the complexity of a merger is that you're not just taking everything from either side. You have an opportunity to consciously reshape what is best for this new company that you have formed. So that means that a lot of things that would be established for many people in CHRO roles in other companies are up for discussion, up for construction, up for reevaluation in DSM Firmenich. That's on the one hand, I think, one of the most gratifying jobs that one can have, that you can build something that is fit for purpose for the new company.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when you're going through a change like that, many people will say you're going too fast. Others will say you're going too slow. So I think where we're going to be as DSM Firmenich when it comes to establishing this new company 12 to 18 months will be very different from where we are now because we're just 4 months into this new merger, into the
Mm-hmm.
closing of our deal. So we're still a baby not having reached puberty yet. So we're in pure forming shape right now.
Which, as you say, can be incredibly rewarding as well, but also challenging from many aspects. And if I were to dial a bit more back in your career, when you first became a CHRO, uh, I was just wondering, when was that in terms of, was that with firmenich? Was that even earlier? And what your if you can sort of go back down memory lane and remember what your first 100 days were like, where was that? Clearly we're talking change now with the
Yeah.
newly established company, but I think there's also a change when you go from one role to another. That was
Yeah,
also change, and I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a bit about that, how that was for you.
sure. My first job at CHRO was back in 2012 when I became the CHRO of the confectionery company Perfetti Van Melle,
Hmm.
which is also mostly known through its brands, Mentos, Chupa Chups, Alpenliebe. It's a big global confectionery company and it had about 30,000 people at the time.
Hmm.
My first 100 days at CHRO in that company, I remember, I mean, the Italian welcoming and hospitality of being a CHRO, it was an extremely friendly environment, welcoming in, very open to saying, look, we've deliberately hired somebody coming out of a different country, out of a different set of experience. I had joined from Sara Lee Corporation, so I was very much, brought up in an Anglo-Saxon tradition. I had lived a long time in the US as well. And there I go joining Perfetti Van Melle, which was the fruit of also a merger, the
Hmm.
merger between the Perfetti Group and the Van Melle Company. But that merger had happened 10 years before I joined. And interestingly, in my first 100 days in that company, I realized that a lot of what I had to do was effectively merging many, many different practices that had existed across the company. It had been one company for 10 years, but it was operating still very much in many ways as two or even a multitude of companies in one go. So it was a bit of a daunting experience. I think every single person starting their first role as a CHRO will find
Mm.
it daunting their first 100 days, to be honest. At least I know I did. But it was a very welcoming environment, very, very open to change. And I think in many, many ways, I've learned so many things that I look back on now being a lot more wise, I would hope, and a lot more mature, where I'm thinking, oh my Lord, with everything I know now, I would have done such and such things differently. But that's learning, right? And
Yeah.
that's those are very formative experience. So from that sense, I've been very fortunate, I think, to have had different experiences that prepared me well for what I have to do right now.
Mm. Which sort of answers the next question I would have asked, but I'm wondering if there's still anything else that helped you transition into your current role, because of course that experience, I can imagine, in those days, as you said, they didn't just merge, they had merged, but you still had to still solidify the merger, which you're doing now. Was there anything else that helped you transition into your current role apart from the experience?
Well, I think you're partially answering the question. Experience is one thing.
Hmm.
You learn a lot of things functionally. You're not going to trip over the same stone twice because you gain a lot of insights and this and that. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of what makes the difference is on the interest that we show in learning about the business and understanding what is really needed from a business perspective. And every single business is different and can be at a different stage of maturity
Hmm.
and may not want a one size fits all approach. In any case, I've rarely seen a lot of successful models, to be honest with you, where a one size fits all approach from an HR perspective ended up well serving very, very different businesses. And in many of the companies that I've worked in, there have always been business units that were quite different from one another.
Hmm.
So I think having a lot of experience is great, but having an openness to listen, to learn, to understand where the business is at, what is needed, what is working, what is not working. That's, I think, at the end of the day, what makes the difference. And there's no recipe for that. It's part of a mindset. So I definitely don't come in with a series of, oh, I've done this 25 years. Here's my
Hmm.
recipe book.
Yeah.
Let's implement this. Because that's when the impact won't be there. So I think, and especially now, also in the context of a merger, taking a step back, rethinking what we do, why we do what we do. I think the better we do that now, the more we're going to be successfully becoming the new company that we want to be, and why we did the merger in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That really sums up nicely your current role and what it took to get here. Now, what I'd like to do is dial back even more along memory lane, looking back at your journey to today. Um, what were some of the formative milestones, looking at your career overall, that you can share with your listeners, especially, the what were successes for you, or what were some of the watch outs that you can also share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think it. I think, as always in life, it's a bit of a combination between having the luck of being somewhere at the right time
Mm-hmm.
and having also a supportive environment that lets you say yes to a lot of things that come your way. Because I've said yes to most of the things that came along my path. When I started working, I ended up in HR a bit by accident. I actually had done linguistics studies at university. I initially set out to be a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a foreign correspondent in the Middle East. I ended up working in the Middle East for quite a while, but then came back, wanted to reorient my career, and landed in HR a bit by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I then had the opportunity to start up the foreign branch of the company that I worked for. I was 26 at the time, and I said, "Well, why not? What do I have to lose? Let's do that." And from there, quite some opportunities that came my way when I joined Sara Lee Corporation. I had the chance to move to the global head office in Chicago. There could be many reasons why couples, because most people don't do this alone. Their
Mm-hmm.
partner comes with, or they have kids. I had a partner. I had two young kids at the time. My partner was super supportive, ended up saying yes. That opened up a series of experiences that I know, if I wouldn't have had that international experience, the CEO of Firmenich would never have hired me as his CHRO. And it's one of the things he ended up saying.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I had lived and worked in the US, that I had lived and worked in Asia, turned out to be extremely important. Um, Exposure to M&A.
Mm-hmm.
Sara Lee Corporation at the time was a holding company. When I had joined it, I think we were about 24 billion in revenue and 100,000 employees at that time, because we had
Wow.
everything in our portfolio, and we ended up shedding and shedding and shedding so many companies. So when I left,
Mm-hmm.
Sara Lee actually ended up existing, because the parts of the business that were left, we had a big coffee business that was left, and that we ended up listing on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange as a pure play company. And then we had a North American meats and bakery business. No, I think we even sold the bakery business at the time. We had a North American meats business that then we also ended up selling, I think, right after I had left. So the company ceased existing. So I had kind of become the master of restructuring, right sizing, selling, spinning off, doing lots of activities that ended up being very relevant again for some of my future opportunities as CHRO, because I'd seen a lot of environments of change and how do you adjust companies to that. But of course, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
10, 15 years before, I had no clue that some of these experiences would actually be leading me to doing what I'm doing now. So I don't know. When somebody comes to me and says, I need a path for my career for the next 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
my first reaction is to laugh and run away, because I'm like, I can't even predict what the world is going to look like next week, let alone
Yeah.
in 10 years. Plus, I also think it's a little bit easy to expect a company to do the thinking for you, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more of the school that as individuals, we have a big role to play in also choosing, being vocal, sometimes make difficult choices.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, if we make them consciously and we expose ourselves to a multitude of opportunities, you're learning a tremendous amount of things. And I think it only adds to possibilities of stuff that you can do next. So there is not a recipe, I think,
Mm-hmm.
other than not closing yourself off or limiting yourself to I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that and I'm no longer open to this. I never took that approach, and I think it helped me tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that because I was, you started off by talking about the luck and having the supportive environment, but as you were speaking, I think that what really came out was also your openness to say yes to a number of assignments, to a number of different situations,
Yeah,
and that's also very important that one has that, I guess, mindset and that attitude. And to your point, I guess none of us know what the next 5 to 10 years will hold. So there is a bit of being open to within probably a framework, but being open to different experiences.
yeah,
So thank you for
very
sharing that.
much so.
Yeah,
If I can just maybe add one thing
sure.
about the supportive environment,
Mm-hmm.
because it sometimes surprises me how many people still today in 2023 don't have that
Mm-hmm.
or don't fight for that. And
Yeah.
it's a debate that sadly we can't disconnect, I think, also from the number of women that we see in senior roles and the sacrifices that many women still have to do more than men still have to do on
Mm-hmm.
occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could also be situations. I mean, I happen to live in Switzerland, which is really not a country, I think, that is very supportive of both partners in a relationship that are, both parents, regardless of the sex of the parents. But it's not a country that is supportive to both people working because of the ridiculous cost of healthcare, lack of flexibility of solutions for kids to go in
Yeah.
preschool or after school. So there are societal hurdles to
Mm-hmm.
living up to potential or a dream or this and that, and there are also social, societal hurdles. There's also economic hurdles, but I think that's still, that's why I said I think I was lucky in that sense, because you need a dose of luck to be able to do all this, and it's not easy for everybody, despite what people would want.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in that in on just staying on that topic for one question further, is there any particular, not necessarily by name person, but any particular role of a person that's supported and helped you and inspired you throughout your professional journey? We talk a lot about mentors and parents, professors. Is there anything there that you can share with us that helped you in your journey in the support?
Yeah,
Mm.
I it really sounds like a cliche, but I don't think I would have been able to do what I do if I wouldn't have had a very supportive spouse. I mean,
Yeah.
at one point,
Mhm.
because we've lived in so many different places around the world, at one point my spouse had to give up his company and was a stay-at-home dad for 7 years, with my kids and my husband being in one country and me working out of another. If you don't have a good relationship and you don't have trust in each other, and you don't support each other truly for what you're doing, none of this. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do my job the way that I have at Firmenich if I wouldn't have had that support.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's something I want to call out, and I think it's so rewarding to be in a relationship where you can support each other professionally as well as individuals. But I think if I look at the workplace, every single leader that I have worked for has taught me a tremendous amount of things on what to do and also on what not to do.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
amazing, I think, how often we reflect on how we see our leaders act or not say certain things or do. Um, I've learned a tremendous amount of things when I was working in the United States about um, there's a degree of politics I find in an American workplace that is quite different from a European workplace. It's,
Mhm.
it's it's an interesting mixture between a very direct managerial approach, but also very savvy networking and not breaking the relation. So I think I learned a lot about the value of networks from having American bosses and living in the U.S.
Mhm.
Um, I the Firmenich C- CEO was relentlessly focused on the business
Mhm.
and demanded that exact same attitude of every single one in the company. So everything we did had to have an impact and a contribution to the business. And that does very special things in how, particularly in our functions, on how we sanity check everything that we do. I mean, there can sometimes be a little bit of a tendency in functions like HR to go for shiny objects.
Mm-hmm.
And I always want to go back to who the hell is going to care? Who's waiting for this?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants this? And sometimes we have to then have a bit of a come to Jesus moment with ourselves, like, okay, this could be very nice. And in theory, it sounds perfect. But if nobody is waiting for this and it doesn't have impact, we can't lose our time, our money, our energy on this. And that balance, right, is a very important one between visioning where do we want to take this, but also how do we have impact.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, I'm working with a new CEO, Dimitri de Vreeze, who is the CEO of dsm-firmenich. And Dimitri has an amazing ability to choose his battles on what is important and what is not important. And that, again, is a very different dimension, which I think is a key for survival
Yeah.
in a merger context, because it's
Yeah.
extremely simple to get drowned and dragged down. And again, there's different facets of leaders that you get to learn from and appreciate, and that I think helps shape us. I mean, we're never finished items, right? Never ever going to be finished items. And I think as long as we stay open to feedback and learning, and now those young kids that I took to the US, they're teenagers now. I can tell you the feedback is brutal. They're 20 and 19 years old, so there's a lot of brutal feedback coming
Yeah.
my way. But I think it's essential to stay grounded, to stay open, and to course correct whenever necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And you did mention earlier on as well that part of it is, of course, it was you had the luck, you had the support, but it was also you taking decisions and you going out to new challenges, if you wish. What I'm wondering is that's part of the individual in an organization, but is there anything that organizations need to do more of, or even have to do in absence of, to help HR leaders transition to senior executive roles in HR? You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think
organizationally. Hmm.
I think there's often this question, right? I mean, can CHROs be CEOs?
Hmm.
Of course, they can be CEOs, but we also have to be realistic that if you have only done HR, the likelihood of you being a credible CEO may not be that big, depending on the type of company that you're in. I mean, I've worked for fast moving consumer goods companies or now business to business companies that have to be super customer oriented. If throughout your career you've not been in front of customers, you've not
Hmm.
led commercial negotiations, you've not been involved in the heart of what constitutes the P&L of your company, I think credibility is a topic, and we shouldn't be naive about that. So, of course, HR professionals have everything to be good CEOs, but then we also have to be realistic with ourselves and probably take a bit of our own medicine and
Mm,
diversify our experiences accordingly, right?
mm, mm.
Just as much as I think, yes, indeed, there are quite some CFOs that become CEOs, but that's not always a success either.
No.
And again, because of credibility, because of breadth of experience, because of versatility and understanding what makes organizations successful. So it's not about whether HR can be the CEO. That's not even a question to me. It's what set of experiences and capabilities do you need to have that prepare you for that? And in that sense, it's a level playing field, because that is the very same question for people that come in through marketing or sales or finance. You need a blended set of experience in many cases to be credible and to be an end to end enterprise leader.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I have one more question on this topic, and then we will migrate a bit towards the end of this talk about the future and HR as CEOs. But one final question on the here and now and what organizations need to do. Is there some advice you would like to give the younger talent listening in to this podcast on um, coming up the HR pipeline, some do's and don'ts? I mean, you clearly mentioned, the set of experiences and capabilities, go out, go for that, go out and get that. But is there anything else you'd like to share with the young talent listening in today?
Yeah, for sure. I think other than the advice on seize different opportunities and get out of your comfort zone and this and that, I think not everybody is meant to be a leader or a generalist, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and
Mm-hmm.
companies are screaming for professionals with very deep functional knowledge as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there are quite some companies that have a model of rotating everybody every 2 to 3 years, and as much as I think that that is a very good path for people that are more prone to being generalists, we also need to not forget that we need to invest in people to have deep, deep expertise in certain domains. That is true for science and research. That is true for digital and tech. That is true for finance. And that is also true for HR, as it is true for many functions. So I'm not a believer in a model that everybody needs to be an HR generalist. We
Mm-hmm.
also are screaming for people that are deep professionals on the reward side of the house or that live
Mm-hmm.
and breathe talent acquisition. Um, so I, you know, stay in tune with what you like, with what gives you
Mm-hmm.
energy, with what motivates you to learn. And it's not because somebody picks a path that that's going to be your path. And having a conversation also then around what works for you and what you would prefer to do that may be a bit different is a healthy conversation. And, you know, 25 years ago, there was a war for talent. Today, there is a war for talent. I think that
Mm-hmm.
war for talent is still going to be there 10, 15 years down the line because the gap between what companies need and what comes out of universities or apprenticeships is sometimes very, very different. And that's going to be one of the big, big social topics that governments and companies will have to converge on how we solve that and how we drive skill building. But it's really going to mean that companies will still always need great talent. And so there is a place for everybody to also be vocal about what works for them. And not everybody needs to become a leader, and not everybody needs to be a generalist.
Mm-hmm. And to your point as well, you can follow your passion. So if you are very passionate about a certain topic, it's fine to have expertise in
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. If you're very, very passionate about international mobility and the tax situation of expatriation, I can tell you companies are going to be dying to hire you, including us. Comes to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. No, well, thank you for that insight. And thank you for also sharing that with our younger talent, because I think it can be very, I mean, it's a complex, confusing world as such.
Yeah.
And, and to your point and my point, it's not the way it used to be. You start a company and your career is set for the next 15, 20 years. It's a constantly moving target. So getting a bit of understanding, a bit of help in the navigation certainly
Yeah.
goes a long way. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can see
Fine.
that with my kids as well.
Yes. Sorry.
It's
Hmm.
hard for them to figure out what they want to do. And so from that angle, if you have a couple of experiences professionally and you come onto something that you think, whoa, I like doing this and I'm actually good at it,
Yeah.
cool,
Mhm.
be vocal about it, think about it. Is that something that you want to keep doing? And don't feel that you have to go into a path that many companies take to just give generic experiences, because that may not be what's working for you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you for that, Mika. I have one last section, a couple of more questions, and we're coming to the close of the interview. But I do want to ask you how you look at our function, the HR human capital function, and how you envisage the future, and what are some of the emerging strengths and opportunities that you see for us?
Yeah. What I love about the function, and I think that's probably why I've stayed in it for 25 years, it wasn't so much a conscious choice. It was just that there were always new opportunities and challenges and interesting things coming our way. Is we
Hmm.
as a function, we have our fingers, our hands in literally every single topic of a company, because we deal with capabilities to grow business, we deal with culture, We deal with a lot of foundational aspects on how to attract, develop, retain people. That the vast set of topics that we deal with is just, I find, extremely inspiring. And with everything happening in the world today, if we just take the last years, right, when we've seen massive growth, then COVID hit,
Mm.
the readjustment that companies had to do, the way that we dealt with how do we retain our people, how do we keep a company going in the midst of a crisis. We then go into a war. We have a lot of geopolitical challenges. China is not, doing what we all hoped it would. I mean, the degree of volatility impacting our business, I think, has rarely been as big and as quick to succeed itself as in the past years. So the role that we play in HR and how we navigate companies along that, what does that mean for how we operate, the business that we're in, the talent that we need, how to retain people in that context. I mean, these different challenges are extremely fascinating to be part of. So it's it's to me a function that is at the heart of how we make all the different functional components of a company come together and work. We're a
Mhm.
tremendous
Mhm.
contributor to making a company be an effective company, if you will,
Mhm.
because a
Mhm.
lot of what we do then also runs around governance. How do teams connect, the operating model that we put in place, what works, what doesn't work, what changes, what needs to change closer to clients, out of China, out of Russia, how do we position ourselves, supply chain independence. The topics hitting the HR desk are extremely numerous, extremely varied, and it requires us to be extremely savvy of how different parts of our business work, what the consequences are, and that breadth and that impact, I feel, make it an absolutely essential function that is going to remain essential even more and more and more for the years to come. So I'm quite optimistic on the need and the relevance of
Mhm.
our function for the years to come.
Mhm. And this savviness, and you also said we are as contributors. Coming to the last question, is this something distinctive that would then say, well, actually, on top of what you said earlier, that you need a set of experiences, we will see more CEOs in the future coming from the HR pipeline because we have the savviness, we have the experiences, we are able to connect the dots, if you wish. Is that something you see in the future, that there will be more CEOs coming from the HR function?
I'd love to flip that, and I would love to see far more people with HR experience also venture out into business roles so that they can gain the breadth that they would need to be CEOs. Because what I do believe is that, and I see that now, I mean, I've done CEO succession a few times myself over the
Hmm.
past years. Every single time, the ability to have a vision about shaping the culture on capabilities that are needed for the company were a key aspect in the choice we made for CEOs
Hmm.
and board members, also for that matter.
Yeah.
Also for non-executives, for independent directors, also there. So it's undeniable that the recognition of the importance of a vision on human capital is there, and that it is an absolute requirement for CEOs. Because we've also seen companies that had significant reputational issues. Most of the time, there were cultural elements, loose governance,
Hmm.
behaviors at the foundation of that. And so, for boards, for investors, for shareholders, the notion of having CEOs that are not just good at running a business through the numbers, but at shaping a company through ways of working, I think that is undeniably established right now.
Hmm.
Whether that's going to mean that more people coming from HR are going to be CEOs, again, I think that's a challenge that many CHROs should take for themselves and think about diversifying experiences probably earlier on in their career. But what I also see, more and more people from the business want to have my job. And I find that absolutely perfect. More
Hmm.
and more senior leaders come to me and say, look, from a succession planning perspective, don't just think of me as being the next president of a business unit. I would want to have your job because of what I can shape, of what I can influence, on how I have an impact on how this organization will run when you look at succession. And I find that a fantastic insight. It's also, I mean, it also says something about, I think, the maturity that the HR function has gained overall
Absolutely.
in
Mhm.
organizations. And I would very much welcome also my successor to come from the business. I mean, there will of course be, great internal HR talent, but it's not just the HR talent pool that will be considered, right? There could
Mhm.
also be really great people coming from the business experience. So from that angle, I think it works both ways.
Fantastic. That's a very inspirational end thought to think about, Mieke. Thank you so much. I want to give you the opportunity if there's any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say to our listeners before we end this podcast.
Take a deep breath. With everything going on in the world, it can be quite daunting out there. And trust your intuition and your instincts. All will be fine.
Thank you, Mieke. This was super interesting and so insightful. Thank you for those also parting thoughts. I certainly learned a lot today, and I hoped it helped our listeners as they think about their own current and future careers. And thank you to our audience who tuned in for this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Insights podcast series or explore the entire catalog or podcast programming from the conference board on our website.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.